So my name is Neelam. By way of introduction, justice drives everything that I think about and talk about. It drives what happens at home, it drives anger, it drives energy, it drives pretty much everything that drives me is driven from justice and injustice. I am a Kashmiri. I'm from Indian Kashmir. So in North India, I'm from the mountains of India. I'm an academic and I found the erasure of women and everything they do in war zones to be quite surprising, and it set me off on a journey of a PhD, which then became more research and more research and more books and more articles. The more I dug, the more I found that there's a lot to know that is not known because of the identity of the person who knows it. Also their location, also the language in which they know it, their qualifications. So these are all these intersectional spaces which erase what you know as not worth knowing. So I'm going to take you through a very quick journey through at what I have been doing in the last 4-5 years. I will not go too far back. So,
sorry, just trying to take it to the beginning.
Okay. So that's my email address. I'm on LinkedIn, I'm on Blue Sky, I'm everywhere on social media. But I'll start from here. This is where we arrive at questioning things. When an alliance of very powerful, very senior heads of state meet and decide what they must not do and then go into wars of different kinds, we have agreed collectively to place our faith in these people and these institutions. And where we are collectively, where nobody seems to have any money of any kind at all, but yet we seem to have a lot more money than we had, say, 100 years ago collectively on the planet. It makes you question your faith in these institutions. And so I'm starting with the fact that I have no faith. That's my opinion. I have no faith in these institutions. And I think it is time to rethink the way we run our world, because clearly we have failed on all counts at every level. So the project that I'm talking to you about has finished last year, but here are some dates, some details of it. It was a 5-year, nearly £20 million project based at LSE and at Middlesex. And we worked in 4 countries, and it was entirely community-based research. None of this research was driven by what we read in London in journals and books and then informed what we wanted to do. It worked the other way around. The communities that we work with, I have worked with for many years, were the communities who drove this project. They were the researchers, they designed what they wanted to do, they designed how they wanted to do it. And of course when you do such things, you speak more than English. 9 languages and 7 different scripts is what we arrived at, which was interesting, complicated. And when we asked them to show us a site map of where they are and how they look at it, they said we draw our own map. We don't like these maps that are given to us, which have this interest and that interest. We draw our own map. So they drew their own map. They've located themselves on the mountains on which they live. So this is Afghanistan, Pakistan and India. Across the rivers and the glaciers that are there. And this is Sri Lanka. Again, they drew the map and decided how they wanted to portray themselves. But this project started in 2019, and as we kicked off, we ran straight into COVID. And then we ran straight into the Taliban taking over Afghanistan. And COVID resulted in major funding cuts. Generally, when a university sees funding cuts, we cut from the edges of the bottom, saying, we don't really need you. We safeguard ourselves. And so, if we were doing a decolonized ethical project, we had to really think, where does the cut land? The most disadvantaged usually face the brunt of a cut. And so there were ethical questions that came up very quickly when the funding cuts happened. 2022, Pakistan had floods which they are still recovering from. And 2022 was also Sri Lanka going into full meltdown. People were in the presidential palace, they threw off the president, they threw away the prime minister, and they got started with a brand new government. So at no point, why am I telling you this is not for sympathy vote? This is to understand that at no point of time, and you all look experienced enough to know this anyway, at no point of time will your life be good, peaceful and fine. Something will happen, some bad news, something is up, something you assume for taken for granted will flip. And so when you have multiple crises at the same time, everybody's opinion about this project was, oh, maybe you need to bail out of a few places because you can't do so much. I'm not doing everything, it's a community-based project, and if they want to carry on doing it, they can. And so during COVID in Pakistan, when we could not do interviews like this, the women suggested they will do interviews like this from the top of their roof of their homes, because they have flat roofs, so I can shout at you, you will hear me. So they carried on continuing to collect data because they found a way that worked for them. Again, we leave it to the community, they generally come up with ideas that work. So we are talking about very, very remote locations, very horrible contexts and words that they will come from, and the margins. You know, my voices from the margins, what I keep thinking and talking about. Our margin is politically frail, our margin is geographically really remote. It takes forever to reach these communities. Flights, planes, walks, taxis, cars, motorcycles, and like 37 hours later you see people. So they are really, really remote, but what they know is of no less value because of their location. So some more margins. These are really, really mountain communities that have lived there for centuries. They know what they know what they know, and they wanted to use what they know how to make to push their livelihood. They did not want a international aid-funded sewing machine in their house because that doesn't do much. So all these are the margins that they have. So some of these places have major climate crisis. Temperatures change, glaciers melting, bears are not going to sleep, leopards are walking around in the middle of the night when they should be not anywhere near the homes. And so we have all these inequalities which come to them. They have very limited access to resources, and their access to information beyond their own world is also very limited because of who they are and what they do. And yet, these are not challenges, these are, it's an and yet story. And yet they make what they make. They know how to do it, they can teach you how to do it, they've been doing it for a very long time. So we ran through these, I don't expect you to read this slide, but I expect you to note the fact that every phase is community driven. They decided that they want to train themselves on how to do research on themselves, and then they did the research on themselves. They didn't want my research team traipsing around asking questionnaires and running surveys. They want to do this themselves. And so they have trained their own capacity to think differently. They know how to think, but when you ask for academic research, you need to think in a certain pattern, and they decided what that pattern would be. Once they had collected all the data, they did the analysis, they did the writing, their names on the publications, and we then arrived at where they said, right, we know what we know how to do, this is what we think we need, and you're going to deliver this as your training. So we did that training, but when we agreed to do some training on craft and marketing, handmade goods and marketing, they were very clear that they wanted to go straight to market. They didn't want any prototypes and we will see and project finishes and you walk away. They wanted to make something, take it to market, so they had proof of concept before we left them. And they insisted on that, which was great. So the project built a commercial phase right at the start of it, saying we will do anything and everything required to make sure that whatever we do is not something that lies in the bottom of your... So the coupled, but is something you have sold and can change your life. So we ran training on how to design goods that will sell in the market, how to price them, how to do the designing yourself rather than wait for some very fancy designer to come tell you what to make. Do it yourself. Figure it out, we will teach you how to do it, but you do it yourself. I'm not going to give you design because the minute I leave, you won't know what to do. So it's about sustainable work, it's about sustainable knowledge that is within the community and building on that. So they know how to weave, this is in Sri Lanka. They know how to weave, but perhaps they don't know how best to do a color combination or how best to dye their own fabrics. How do you learn all aspects of your trade with zero resources? And how do you ask for that when you're a woman in a patriarchal society who does not have much of a chance for asking questions? So they went along looking at other markets, they looked at other shops, they got together and did group discussions about color and how they perceive color and what's traditionally done. But they also gave us a lot of information about how they look at themselves and their work, which is very feminist way of looking at it, but also a decolonized lens which allows them to say, I meet with you and her to make carpets at night because the husband's going to sleep, the kids are in bed, food has been done, house is clean, Now you three, us three, will have a cup of tea, we will exchange stories about our day, and then we will work together. So most of this work is group work, and most of this work is done by women at night. And therefore it is classified, surprise, surprise, as a hobby. Seriously, right? And so it's a hobby, it's a pastime, you really enjoy doing this. You should have no cultural ambitions, is what we came up against. Which again, injustice. If she wants to be a business, she wants to be a business. You need to equip her to be that business. So all of these women whose faces you cannot see, and everyone that I do has some child who eats papers in my workshops. There are no children here, but it's not a workshop. And they collectively know each other, they know how it works, and they ask some really pointed questions. And when they don't like something, they will let you know. So they are pretty strong women, but when you meet them, they will not say much because they've been trained to behave in a certain way, in a certain setting. So it takes a while for the community to work. But I've been working in these spaces since 2013. So I have known these people. The kids that I knew when I was doing a PhD have grown up and got married. So it's been a long time. And this is the COVID format. They had done their tests. I'm there at the bottom of the screen from my home in London doing work via Zoom because they didn't want to stop. They didn't want to give up. They just wanted to carry on. And who am I to tell somebody to test their own safety levels? They know what to do. And if they want to do it, that's fine. And then we ran workshop upon workshop in various different cities where we brought in these women. So these women are from a refugee camp in Indian Jammu. They moved from Kashmir to Jammu because of their religious identity. There was genocide. People like me were thrown out of our region because of who we are. They went back to Kashmir for the first time, picked up a paintbrush and really, really enjoyed working on these things. Because commercialization was at the heart of it. This was not painting because this is very fun for women to sit together and knit. No, we were doing something that would result in income. We asked them to sell things for themselves because very often women in these locations get a man to do the selling for them because it's something they can't really do. They are really good saleswomen because they know how to sell, because they know who the user of these products are. So this lady here did her first sales pitch and she spoke about her own work, but 5 minutes into her conversation she said, "This has been done by hand by me. I learned this from my grandmother. I know how to make this. I would buy it for my house. In fact, I have my own work in my house." So she gave the best sales pitch without me. I learned this in preparation. So we wanted to make sure they learned the skills that they wanted to learn. They wanted to learn how to do block printing so that they could do embroidery on it. And so we had a whole team of people inside the community who were helping us with this project. The person on the right is our team-based researcher who is amazing. And these are women in Sri Lanka who were buying really expensive, very bad quality chemical dyes to dye their baskets with. But they all had seen, and these are women, somebody in the family used tea bags and cinnamon bark to do diamonds, some grandmother somewhere, and there's a faint memory. And that tacit knowledge that goes across generations had come to them. So what they were doing was contradictory to what they had seen as kids. But they were doing it because that's how they were told they will save money making things. But the minute we changed the dye and said, okay, let's look at local stuff, hang on, give us half a day. They went to the market, they picked up whatever they knew would work, brought it in, and then we dyed things to colors that they wanted on the right from things that were natural dyes. Again, the underlying conflict here with the people here is there is a community clash along ethnic religious lines. There's a division in the community based on Hindu-Muslim. Here, it's the same thing. There are different ethnicities, and you can see that there's a religious difference between people, and there have been much violence along these lines in the community. My work with the different ethnicities looks at women, peace and security, how women in communities are the best placed to build any kind of peace. And economic empowerment, economic strength, economic decision making allows you to have a voice. And this is again them saying that this works for them. This is the refugee camp on both sides of the image, where we went back to drop off some stuff that they had made. And I don't think this video will work, but I'll skip past. And so we had done all these trainings, made all these products, traveled all over the place with these people, figured a lot of stuff out in 3 years. And in 2023, we brought all these things to UK to do the Handmade in Britain show in Oxford. Every item on the wall is made by the women in these communities. The deal was that we make everything, we ship it to the UK, we paid for the raw materials and everything from the project, we shipped it to the UK, we sold it with everybody's name behind each item. So if you buy that red plate on the wall, at the back it says who's the maker and where they are from. And we kept a note, and all the money we made went back to that individual maker. And that has worked as seed capital for most of these networks of women who have set up their own cooperative businesses. So all the labeling happened in my house. The house was like a warehouse. The blue tags had people's names and their location. The round tags had their price. Again, the price was something they told us, this I want to sell for £10. And we said, well, we can sell this for 20. But how much can you really sell it for? Maybe about something 70 because we're selling it in the UK. Okay then. So we sold it for 70. Why not? And it all sold. And so all the money went back to them. And so instead of receiving the small fraction that they would sold it in India or Pakistan, Sri Lanka, we sold it at a crazy price. This is all handmade stuff. It's good quality. It's not hobby based. It's a proper product. And that's the store at Handmade in Britain in Oxford. It nearly killed me to do this. The carpets are from Afghanistan, the cushions are from Kashmir, the scarves are from 2 or 3 countries. And so it's not a business. This is a research project. So we cannot we made profit, but the profit has to go back to the maker because as a university, we are not allowed to hold these profits. What we came up against, and I would like you to think about these challenges, is that patriarchal norms which become normalized, absolutely accepted, the way you behave, the way you speak, how you sit next to a man that's sitting next to you. To think about these challenges are embedded inside the system. Nobody questions those. Women often have to hold their silence or allow or expected to show passionate grief at the loss and trauma of a death of a child or a young person in the community. As a woman, I'm supposed to cry that my nephew was killed. I am not supposed to have a political opinion, especially if it is different from the men in my house. I'm supposed to subscribe to approximately the same political thought. Community practices led by women and their losses in the space of knowledge, of opportunity are not mapped, registered or recorded. So if your business shut down, really sorry, but look what's going on. But it doesn't register because it's not a business. Am I making sense? Tacit learning, which is learning that people, you know how to tie your shoelaces because somebody showed you. For the rest of your life, you will tie those shoelaces and you would probably tie somebody else's laces if they were a trip. You can probably teach a child how to tie his laces. You did not learn how to tie a lace by reading a book. Right? There are different types of knowledge, and very often knowledge that we have embedded inside our head, if you go towards a hot pan, you will grab a tea towel sometimes because you know now not to touch it. Nobody told you, but you saw it. You saw how to stir chicken, you saw how to cut onions without frying. You saw all these things, and you know how to do all these things. But because you are female and there's a colonial problem here, all of that knowledge is erased. And so the tacit learning that is within these communities, they can make beautiful embroideries, but they never went to design school. Does it not matter? Does it not count? Is it not valued as much? So their food, their song, their textiles, their businesses are impacted by the conflict, but what they know is not seen as of any value within the conflict setting. Growing older in conflict contexts, the internalized loss has done a lot of damage to most of these women and political ideology that I spoke about. And yet, two communities who are so at war with each other that in some settings, the person on the right visits your home, you offer them a cup of tea, you will throw the bill. That's how much the animosity between these communities is. And I've seen this happening in person within the family setting. And yet this project, which looked at creativity and tacit knowledge, brought people together I didn't ask them to talk to each other. They chose to sit next to each other and talk to each other. Happily so, they exchange WhatsApp numbers, they become a whole group and they gossip, which is great. But conversations between women of different communities is very different from the NATO conversations. And we need to realize that there's value to these as well. Well, perhaps more than the NATO conversations I would like to argue. Young men and women have very little space to exert in these as well. Influence in these settings, and the loss of many young people poses the possibility of conversations There's a lot of polarization and a lot of black and white spaces which are becoming even worse. There is a complete disappearance of middle ground, and this is applicable to the UK as well. It's become very polarized as a space. If you are middle ground, you generally hold your silence because you will be called woke, and that is a problem. Wokeism is linked to privilege, which is not applicable here. The community-based shared practices have been permanently erased, and speaking about them is also forbidden. So when you reflect back, saying, oh, before the conflict, you and I used to sit and, we used to go to the movie together and go to the cinema locally and went to the same school. Once the conflict comes in between a community, that conversation and reflection is not allowed. Okay, I'm really done. And yet, we managed to make things and sell them. On the right are the women from the community whose shawl she's wearing on the left, and they had a WhatsApp video call to see how the things are selling. Of course, they will not get visas to come to the UK. And we have mapped that fragmented societies need women's narratives. We need to understand inequity in these spaces. And we need to understand that commercial impact of research that uses community-based knowledge is commercial, and we should not be holding them back. Gendered community-based knowledge and its perceived value outside of the community needs to be talked about a little bit more. Again, sorry, I hate throwing text at people, but intergenerational knowledge is important, but also from the UK, when we go into work with people, we are told how to safeguard people, which is the assumption that you don't know how to safeguard them. And so when we went to the community with our safeguarding guidebook, they just threw it saying, we know how to do this. You are at risk being here, we live here. Safeguard yourself, don't tell us how to do it. And so principles of care are important, but imposing constructs because you assume they don't know anything about them is the wrong way to look at things. Empathy and solidarity are key, and I think what you started off with the starfish story, if you have empathy for that starfish, you know that you can work with other people who will have the same empathy. And so, in a space which is divided and fragmented, I think that's the key takeaway from my work. But here's what I want to throw back at you. This is the last slide. We need to rethink our contract and goods services and systems. Whatever we are doing right now is not working for most of us. It is definitely working for some of us, but not working for most of us. But most of us have been hardwired to think this is the way to do it, there is no alternative. I'm really sorry, but there is no alternative. There is always an alternative. We just need to start questioning and pushing really hard. There's an urgent need to think about how we see ourselves and our relationships with others. And we need to understand what we are placing at risk. Will this be like this 20 years from now? Probably not at the rate at which we are going. So what do we want to hold on to that we value, that we will not negotiate about? And how do we then press ahead into what we want to do? And very small text, but if you put my name and PDF, you will find every article we have written collectively together. Thank you very much.